A world-class language expert was called in to expose Maya, but the test produced the exact opposite result. A millionaire tossed a $20 bill onto the floor and dared a black waitress to pick it up. Then, in front of 60 stunned diners, he bet $100,000 that she couldn't speak a single word of Chinese. What started as a cruel attempt to humiliate her quickly spiraled into something nobody expected. Because Maya Brooks wasn't just a waitress. Hidden behind her quiet smile was a lifetime of sacrifice, secret talent, and kindness that would change the lives of everyone in that room. Before the night was over, a multi-million-dollar deal would be shaken. A billionaire would reveal a shocking truth, and the woman everyone underestimated would become impossible to ignore. The golden lights of Lakeshore Terrace reflected across the dark waters of Lake Michigan like scattered diamonds. Inside the restaurant, crystal glasses shimmered beneath chandeliers imported from Italy. Soft jazz floated through the room. Expensive perfume mixed with the scent of grilled steak and garlic butter. Wealthy couples laughed quietly over wine bottles that cost more than some families spent on groceries in a month. Maya Brooks moved through the dining room carrying a silver tray balanced effortlessly on one hand. She wore a simple black uniform, her name tag polished, her hair neatly tied back. Most people who looked at her saw only a waitress. They never saw the woman who woke up before sunrise to help at a community kitchen. They never saw the daughter who spent nights researching kidney treatments for her sick mother. They never saw the sister working double shifts so her younger brother wouldn't have to quit college. They saw an apron, nothing more. "Table 12 needs sparkling water," another server whispered as he hurried past. "Got it." Maya smiled and kept moving. Outside, the Chicago skyline glowed beyond the windows. Inside, 60 guests filled the dining room. Tonight was different. Everyone knew it. The owner had spent the entire afternoon preparing for the arrival of Charles Whitmore. Charles wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of man newspapers called visionary. The kind of man television hosts invited onto business panels. The kind of man who owned buildings people could see from miles away. Rumor said he was about to close a $90 million development deal with investors visiting from China. And tonight's dinner was supposed to impress them. The front doors opened. Conversations softened immediately. Charles Whitmore entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being noticed. Tall, silver-haired, tailored navy suit. A watch worth more than Maya's yearly income. Beside him walked his wife, Margaret. Behind them came his business partner, Raymond, and 4 distinguished guests led by a calm older man named Mr. Liang. The owner rushed forward personally. Hands were shaken, smiles exchanged. The VIP party was escorted to the largest table in the restaurant. Maya didn't think much about it. Rich people came through those doors every night. Some were kind, some weren't. Money didn't always tell you which was which. The head server approached. "Maya." "Yeah? You're covering the Whitmore table." She blinked. "Me? Everyone else is slammed. Just be careful." Maya nodded. "No problem." She picked up a wine list and walked toward the table. Before she could even introduce herself, Charles looked up. His eyes traveled from her face to her apron. The faint smile disappeared. "I asked for your senior staff." The owner immediately stepped closer. "Sir, Maya is one of our best. I didn't ask for one of your best." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I asked for someone capable of handling international guests." The owner shifted awkwardly. "Maya is perfectly capable." Charles looked at her again, this time slower, longer, like he was evaluating merchandise. "We'll see." The conversation at nearby tables continued, but several people were already paying attention. Maya kept her expression professional. "What can I get started for you this evening, sir?" Mr. Liang smiled politely. Before he could answer, Charles interrupted. "Do you speak Chinese?" The question seemed random. Maya simply said, "What would you like to drink tonight?" A small laugh escaped Charles. Not a pleasant one. A dismissive one. You didn't answer the question. I speak English fluently, sir. Charles leaned back. That's not what I asked. A few heads turned. Margaret glanced at her husband. Raymond stared into his water glass. The Chinese guests remained silent. Maya maintained her composure. What can I bring for the table? Charles shook his head. Incredible. Then he laughed louder. These days everybody pretends they're qualified. The room seemed slightly quieter now. Not silent, but watchful. Maya could feel it. She had felt it before. The moment when a person decided who she was before learning anything about her. The moment assumptions became facts. The moment respect vanished. She had lived through those moments her entire life. Charles picked up the wine list. Tell me something. His smile widened. If I handed you a Chinese menu right now, could you read even one line? Maya said nothing. A few nearby diners exchanged uncomfortable glances. Margaret shifted in her chair. Charles. But he wasn't finished. You know what? Never mind. He reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, removed a $20 bill, then casually dropped it. The green bill fluttered through the air, landing directly on the polished hardwood floor beside Maya's shoes. Several gasps echoed across nearby tables. Charles pointed downward. Pick it up. Silence. The jazz music suddenly seemed very far away. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the waitstaff froze. Maya looked at the bill, then back at Charles. His expression remained calm, almost amused. Go ahead. His voice carried farther this time. Pick it up. The owner looked horrified. Sir, that's not necessary. Charles ignored him. $20. He smiled. Probably more useful to her than it is to me. A couple near the window stopped eating. A businessman lowered his fork. Someone quietly set down a wine glass. The room had become an audience. Maya felt heat rise into her chest. Not embarrassment. Not exactly. Something older. Something deeper. A lifetime of being underestimated. A lifetime of people assuming they knew her story. Assuming they knew her worth. She remembered helping her mother calculate medication costs at the kitchen table. She remembered watching Caleb pretend not to worry about tuition bills. She remembered every job interview, every suspicious glance, every polite smile that disappeared after people heard her address. And now this man wanted her to bend down and prove him right. Charles looked around the room, then back at her. What's the matter? His grin widened. You don't want free money? Nobody breathed. Then Charles reached for his whiskey. And I guarantee one more thing. He raised his glass slightly. I'd bet $100,000 this young lady can't speak a single sentence of Chinese. The number hit the room like thunder. $100,000. Several diners openly turned toward the table now. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Charles took a sip, still smiling. Not one sentence. Maya stared at him. The $20 bill remained on the floor, waiting, like a test, like a trap, like everything he believed she was worth. The owner looked ready to faint. Margaret closed her eyes. Raymond rubbed his forehead. Across the table, Mr. Liang studied Maya carefully for the first time. The entire restaurant waited. Some expected her to walk away. Some expected her to cry. Some expected her to pick up the money and end the humiliation. Instead, Maya slowly lifted her chin. Her eyes locked onto Charles Whitmore, the billionaire, the man who believed money could define value, the man who thought he already knew exactly who she was. Then Maya spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, clear enough for every person in the restaurant to hear. "Say it louder, sir." For the first time that night, Charles Whitmore stopped smiling. And all across the dining room, 60 people leaned forward, because suddenly everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why wasn't she afraid? And what exactly did this waitress know that nobody else did? The question lingered in the air like the final note of a song that refused to fade. For a moment, nobody in Lakeshore Terrace moved. The chandeliers glowed overhead. Ice slowly melted inside crystal glasses. The $20 bill remained on the floor between Maya Brooks and Charles Whitmore. Charles stared at her. Not because she had insulted him. She hadn't. Not because she had challenged him. She hadn't done that either. What unsettled him was something far more unusual. She wasn't intimidated. People usually reacted to Charles Whitmore in predictable ways. They smiled too quickly, laughed too loudly, apologized before they had done anything wrong. Money had a way of teaching people to surrender before a battle even started. But Maya Brooks simply stood there, calm, still, watching him. The silence finally broke when the restaurant manager hurried forward. "Maya," his voice was tight. "Come with me for a moment." She knew what that meant. Damage control, protect the customer, protect the restaurant, protect everyone except the waitress. Without another word, Maya followed him toward the service hallway. As soon as the swinging kitchen doors closed behind them, the noise of the dining room became muffled. The manager ran both hands across his face. "What are you doing? I was serving a table. You know what I mean." Maya remained quiet. The kitchen staff pretended not to listen. Every single one of them listened anyway. "That's Charles Whitmore." "I know. He spends more money in one dinner than some people make in a month." Maya folded her arms. He threw money on the floor. The manager sighed heavily. "Maya." "No." Her voice stayed soft. "He threw money on the floor and told me to pick it up." The manager looked away, because he had seen it. Everyone had. And everyone knew she was right. Still, reality was reality. This job matters. It matters to me, too. Then don't lose it. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, the manager lowered his voice. "Just get through tonight." Maya nodded, but inside she felt something familiar. A feeling she'd carried for years. The feeling of being asked to accept less respect than everyone else. The feeling of being expected to smile while it happened. The feeling wasn't new. It had started long before Lakeshore Terrace. Long before Charles Whitmore. Long before she ever wore an apron. It started on the south side, 20 minutes away from the glittering lakefront. A completely different world. The neighborhood where Maya grew up didn't have luxury condos. It had brick apartment buildings with peeling paint, corner stores with flickering neon signs, bus stops crowded before sunrise, sirens in the distance, kids playing basketball beneath streetlights that buzzed all night. Maya loved that neighborhood, even when it was difficult, even when people called it dangerous, because it was home. It was where her mother Denise still lived, where Caleb came home during college breaks, where neighbors knew each other's names, where people borrowed sugar from next door and watched each other's children, where kindness survived despite everything. Maya thought about that neighborhood often while working among Chicago's wealthy elite, especially nights like this. Her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. She glanced down. A text from Caleb. "How's work?" She smiled despite everything. Same circus, different clowns. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Love you, sis." "Love you too." The message disappeared, but the warmth stayed. Caleb never knew how much those small texts helped. Neither did Denise. Every Tuesday and Thursday, before reporting to Lakeshore Terrace, Maya spent 4 hours helping at a community kitchen near 47th Street. Nobody paid her. Nobody asked her to do it. She simply showed up. Sometimes she chopped vegetables. Sometimes she handed out meals. Sometimes she sat beside elderly residents who only needed someone willing to listen. Her friends often told her she gave too much of herself away. Maybe she did. But Maya remembered what it felt like when strangers had helped her family during hard times, when Denise got sick, when medical bills started arriving, when fear became part of everyday life. Kindness had carried them through. So Maya kept giving it away whenever she could, even when she didn't have much left. Especially then. Back in the dining room, Charles Whitmore sat surrounded by expensive suits and polished smiles. But his attention wasn't on the investment deal anymore. It wasn't on Mr. Liang, or the waterfront project, or the $90 million. It was on the waitress who had looked him directly in the eye. Margaret noticed first. "You're still thinking about her." Charles took a sip of whiskey. "I'm thinking about attitude." She wasn't disrespectful. His jaw tightened slightly. "No." Margaret glanced toward the kitchen doors, then maybe let it go. Charles didn't answer. Across the table, Mr. Liang quietly observed the exchange. He had spent decades negotiating international deals, long enough to recognize something most people missed: pride. And pride was often more dangerous than greed. Meanwhile, in the hallway behind the kitchen, Maya leaned against a wall for a brief moment, just long enough to take a breath. A dishwasher named Luis approached. "You okay?" She laughed softly. "Depends." "On what? Whether I still have a job tomorrow." Luis shook his head. "You should have seen his face." Maya smiled despite herself. "What face?" "The one he made when you told him to say it louder." For the first time all evening, she laughed. A real laugh. Short, unexpected, human. Then it faded, because beneath the humor was a question she couldn't ignore. How had her life led to this moment? How had a girl from Southside Chicago ended up standing in front of one of the richest men in Illinois? The answer stretched back years, back to long afternoons after school, back to hospital waiting rooms, back to sacrifices nobody ever noticed, back to dreams she had quietly placed on hold, dreams of becoming a medical interpreter, dreams of helping families navigate hospitals without fear, dreams that kept getting postponed because reality kept demanding something else: rent, medicine, bills, responsibility. The kitchen doors swung open again. The manager returned. His expression looked exhausted. "They need service." Maya nodded. "Okay. Are you sure?" She straightened her apron, smoothed the front of her uniform, lifted her chin, the same way she always did. "I've got a table to serve." As she walked toward the dining room, nobody noticed something else. Outside the restaurant, parked across the street beneath the glow of a street lamp, sat a black sedan. Inside was an older white man wearing a worn coat. Henry Lawson. He hadn't left. He watched the restaurant through the rain-speckled window, and for the second time that evening, he found himself thinking about Maya Brooks. Not because of the argument, not because of the bet, but because she had shown him something increasingly rare. Dignity, the kind that couldn't be bought, the kind that appeared only when everything else was stripped away. Henry looked toward the restaurant entrance. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. Then he quietly said something to himself. Interesting. Back inside, Maya pushed through the doors and stepped once again into the spotlight she never asked for. The entire restaurant seemed to notice. The investors noticed. The diners noticed. Charles Whitmore noticed. And this time, Maya wasn't the only one watching. Because somewhere in that room, the future had already started changing direction. Nobody knew it yet. Not Charles. Not the guests. Not even Maya herself. But before this night ended, the reason she wasn't afraid would finally be revealed. And when it was, everything would change. The dining room seemed brighter than before, not because the lights had changed, because attention had. Every eye that had been casually drifting between wine glasses and dinner plates was now anchored to a single table near the center of the room. Charles Whitmore's table. And Maya Brooks was walking straight toward it. The polished hardwood floor reflected the glow of hanging chandeliers. Soft jazz had returned, but it sounded distant now, like music coming from another room. People weren't listening to the band. They were listening for what would happen next. Maya picked up a water pitcher from the service station and continued her work as if nothing unusual had happened. As if a millionaire hadn't just challenged her in front of 60 people. As if a $100,000 bet wasn't hanging in the air. As if a $20 bill wasn't still lying on the floor beside Charles's chair. That calm unsettled Charles more than anything else. He watched her approach. Margaret noticed. She's not rattled. Charles took a slow sip of whiskey. Everybody gets rattled. Not everyone. He ignored her. Across the table, Mr. Liang quietly observed the exchange. Years of international business had taught him something important. Character revealed itself under pressure. Not during success. Not during comfort. Under pressure. And tonight, pressure was squeezing everyone. Maya stopped beside the table. Would anyone like more water? Her voice was steady. Professional. The older Chinese woman sitting beside Mr. Liang smiled politely. Thank you. Maya refilled her glass. Nothing more. No attitude. No sarcasm. No attempt to embarrass anyone. The woman seemed surprised. So did Mr. Liang. So did Raymond. Because kindness after humiliation was something most people didn't expect. Especially from someone who had every reason to be angry. As Maya moved around the table, a memory flashed through her mind. Rain. Cold rain. Only 3 hours earlier, the beginning of the night, before the argument, before the bet, before Charles Whitmore walked through the front doors. Back then, the evening had seemed ordinary. The sky above Chicago had been gray and heavy. Wind rolled off Lake Michigan in sharp gusts that rattled street signs and pushed rain sideways through downtown. Maya had arrived early for her shift. The bus had dropped her 2 blocks away. She had pulled her coat tighter and hurried through the weather. Then she saw him, an older white man sitting alone at a bus stop. No umbrella, no gloves, no hat. His coat looked worn and soaked through. Water dripped from the brim of an old baseball cap. Most people walked past him. Some glanced briefly. Nobody stopped. The man was staring at the street with tired eyes. His hands trembled. Maya slowed. Something about him felt wrong. Not dangerous. Just lonely. Very lonely. She checked the time. Her shift started in 15 minutes. She could keep walking. Most people would. Instead, she crossed the sidewalk. Sir? The man looked up. His eyes were clear but exhausted. You okay? He gave a small smile. I've been better. The rain intensified. Cars sprayed water across the street. Maya looked around. Do you have somewhere warm to go? The man hesitated, then shrugged. I suppose eventually. That answer told her everything. She sat beside him on the wet bench, ignoring the rain, ignoring the cold, ignoring the fact that she was already running late. "My name's Maya." The man looked surprised. "Henry. Nice to meet you, Henry." He laughed softly. "You're probably the first person who's said that all day." Something inside Maya tightened. Nobody should sound that grateful just because someone spoke to them. She studied him carefully. There was intelligence in his eyes, education, dignity, but also exhaustion, the kind that had nothing to do with weather. "You eaten today?" Henry smiled. "That's quite a question. Usually means no." He laughed again, a little louder this time. "No, not really." Maya stood immediately. "Stay here." Before he could respond, she jogged toward the restaurant. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying a takeout container. Steam drifted into the cold air. Chicken soup, fresh bread, coffee. The kitchen staff had packed it for her when she explained. Henry stared at the food, then at her. "You bought this? It's dinner." His voice grew quieter. "I can't pay you." "I didn't ask." For a moment, he simply looked at her. Rain continued falling. Traffic continued moving. The city continued rushing past. But something slowed between them. Something human. Henry accepted the food, carefully, almost reverently, the way someone receives a gift they didn't expect. "Thank you." Maya shrugged. "My grandma used to say nobody should be cold and hungry at the same time." Henry smiled. "Your grandmother sounds smart." "She was." The old man nodded slowly, then asked something unexpected. "Do you always stop for strangers?" Maya thought about it. "Not always." "Then why me?" She glanced toward the lake, the rain, the empty sidewalk, then back at him. "Because you looked like you needed someone to notice you." For several seconds, Henry said nothing. His eyes softened, as though those words had reached someplace very deep. Finally, he asked, "And what if I told you I wasn't worth helping?" Maya laughed. "That's not your decision." The old man stared at her, really stared, then smiled. Not politely, not formally, genuinely. It was the first real smile she'd seen from him. Minutes later, she called a taxi. When it arrived, she handed Henry her spare scarf. "You'll freeze without this." "I couldn't." "You can." The driver opened the door. Henry climbed inside, then paused. "You've been very kind to me." Maya shrugged again. "It costs nothing." The taxi pulled away. She watched it disappear into the rain. Then she hurried toward work, thinking she'd probably never see him again. Now, hours later, standing inside one of Chicago's most expensive restaurants, she had no idea that Henry Lawson was still thinking about that moment. Across the street, inside the black sedan. The old man watched through the rain-covered window. His driver sat quietly. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, the driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Should I take you home, Mr. Lawson?" Henry didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the restaurant. On Maya, on the young woman moving through the dining room, carrying trays and water pitchers. The same woman who had offered kindness without knowing who he was, without expecting anything, without asking for anything. Most people treated him differently once they learned his name, his money, his influence. Maya never had that chance, and somehow that made her kindness worth more. Far more. "No." Henry finally answered. "We'll stay." The driver looked confused. "For how long?" Henry's eyes remained on the restaurant. A faint smile appeared. "I have a feeling this is about to become a very interesting evening." Back inside, Maya finished refilling glasses. As she stepped away from the table, she heard Mr. Liang quietly speaking Mandarin to his wife. Most people in the room didn't notice. Most people couldn't understand. Maya did. Every word. She didn't react. Not outwardly. But she listened. And what she heard made her slow down. Just slightly. Because Mr. Liang wasn't talking about the deal. He wasn't talking about Chicago. He wasn't talking about business. He was talking about Charles Whitmore. And the observation he made would change everything. Maya continued walking. The tray felt suddenly lighter in her hands. The room suddenly quieter. The moment suddenly closer. And for the first time all night, she realized something important. Charles Whitmore thought he understood exactly who she was. But in a matter of minutes, he was about to discover how wrong he had been. Very wrong. Maya continued walking across the dining room with the empty tray balanced against her hip. The rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Outside, Chicago shimmered beneath a blanket of wet pavement and reflected city lights. Inside, the warmth of Lakeshore Terrace wrapped around its guests like a luxury they barely noticed anymore. Maya heard every word Mr. Liang had spoken. She heard them clearly. But she gave no sign. Years of customer service had taught her something valuable. Sometimes silence was stronger than a reaction, especially when people underestimated you. At the table, Mr. Liang folded his hands calmly. His wife sat beside him, elegant and observant. Raymond stared at the wine list without really seeing it. Margaret looked increasingly uncomfortable. Charles Whitmore looked pleased with himself. The difference between them was simple. Only one person at the table believed the night was still under his control. Charles. The restaurant owner, Daniel Mercer, approached cautiously. "Mr. Whitmore, may I offer another bottle from our reserve collection?" Charles waved him off. "In a minute." His eyes followed Maya. Daniel noticed. He also noticed the $20 bill still lying beside the table. The sight made his stomach tighten. Lakeshore Terrace had spent 20 years building a reputation for elegance. Tonight, it felt like the room had become an arena, a place where people were waiting for someone to win and someone else to lose. Daniel hated that feeling. But there was nothing he could do now. The moment had already started, and moments like this had a way of creating their own momentum. Across the room, whispers floated from table to table. Did he really bet $100,000? I heard it. Who does that? She's going to walk out. No, she isn't. How do you know? Look at her. The woman speaking nodded toward Maya. The waitress wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She was simply doing her job. And somehow that made the entire situation stranger. Most people would have broken. Maya hadn't. Charles leaned toward Raymond. "Watch this." Raymond sighed. "Charles, what?" "Let it go," Charles smirked. "Why?" "Because you're turning a dinner meeting into a circus." A flicker of irritation crossed Charles's face. "I am trying to determine whether the people serving my investors are qualified." "No." Raymond took a sip of water. "You're trying to win." The words landed harder than expected. For a second, Charles said nothing. Then he looked away. Because Raymond wasn't entirely wrong. Winning mattered to Charles. It always had. The need had started long before the money, long before the skyscrapers, long before magazine covers and television interviews, back when nobody respected him, back when he was the kid wearing cheap shoes, back when people laughed at his father's used car dealership, back when success felt like the only escape. Somewhere along the way, winning had become more important than understanding people. And tonight, he couldn't stop himself. Not when an employee had challenged him in front of investors. Not when 60 people were watching. not when a waitress refused to be intimidated. Across the dining room, Maya stopped beside another table. An elderly couple was celebrating their anniversary. She smiled warmly. "Can I get you anything else tonight?" The husband smiled. "Just the check." His wife touched Maya's arm. "You handled yourself beautifully." Maya blinked. The woman nodded toward Charles's table. "You don't owe anyone proof of your worth." For a brief second, emotion touched Maya's face. Not because of the compliment, because it had been a long time since a stranger said something kind for no reason. "Thank you," she said softly. The woman squeezed her hand. Then Maya moved on. Charles saw the interaction. Something about it irritated him further. People were taking her side. The realization made him uncomfortable. At the center table, Mr. Liang quietly spoke to his wife again in Mandarin. This time, the conversation lasted longer. Still calm, still private, still unnoticed by everyone except Maya. She passed nearby carrying a tray of drinks. The words drifted toward her effortlessly. Mr. Liang said, "A man who humiliates employees in public usually treats partners the same way in private." His wife nodded. "And a person who remains respectful under pressure often reveals more character than the person creating the pressure." Maya continued walking. No reaction, no expression. But inside, something shifted. Not confidence. Not yet. Validation. The kind that comes when someone sees what others refuse to see. Meanwhile, outside in the black sedan, Henry Lawson watched through the rain. He had spent decades evaluating people, employees, executives, investors, competitors. Most of the time, talent announced itself loudly. But character was different. Character revealed itself in small moments, moments nobody thought mattered, like offering food to a stranger, like staying kind after being insulted, like refusing to trade dignity for approval. Henry had built an empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet sitting there, watching Maya move through the restaurant, he found himself more interested in her than in the real estate mogul entertaining investors. His driver glanced back. "You seem impressed." Henry smiled. "I am." "Because she speaks Chinese?" Henry chuckled. "I don't even know if she speaks Chinese." "Then what?" Henry looked through the rain-covered glass. "Because she knows who she is." Back inside, the first course arrived. Steaks, sea bass, duck, truffle potatoes. Maya and the other servers moved carefully through the dining room. For a while, normal restaurant life tried to resume. Forks clinked. Wine poured. Conversations restarted. But the tension remained, like a storm cloud, waiting for the right moment. Eventually, Charles set down his fork. His patience had run out. He looked directly at Maya. "Excuse me." The room quieted instantly. Maya stopped. "Yes, sir?" Charles leaned back in his chair. A slow smile appeared. The same smile that had started all of this. "I've been thinking." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Charles tapped a finger against his whiskey glass. "Maybe I was too generous." The silence deepened. "What do you mean?" Maya asked. Charles smiled wider. "I offered $100,000 if you could speak Chinese." His eyes narrowed slightly. "But we still haven't heard a single word." Every nearby table turned toward them. The investors watched. The owner watched. The staff watched. Even the musicians slowed. The atmosphere became electric. Maya placed her tray on a nearby service stand. Slowly. Deliberately. Then she turned. Not toward Charles. Toward Mr. Liang. The older investor raised an eyebrow. Maya's expression remained calm, respectful, composed. And for the first time that night, the entire restaurant sensed that the moment Charles had been waiting for was finally arriving. What nobody realized was that the next few seconds wouldn't simply change the dinner. They would change everything that came after. And Charles Whitmore was about to learn that the most dangerous mistake a person can make is assuming they already know someone else's limits. Because Maya Brooks was about to speak, and once she did, there would be no going back. The dining room seemed to hold its breath. Even the rain outside appeared softer now, sliding down the tall windows in silver streaks that reflected the city lights. Maya stood beside the table. Charles Whitmore sat with his whiskey glass resting lightly between his fingers. Mr. Liang watched her carefully. Margaret looked uneasy. Raymond looked curious. 60 people waited. The entire room had become one giant pause. Maya met Mr. Liang's eyes. Then she smiled politely. But before she could say a single word, something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced. Not because she wanted it to, because moments like this always dragged old wounds into the light. Suddenly, she wasn't standing in Lakeshore Terrace anymore. She was standing inside St. Anthony Medical Center 3 years earlier. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. Monitors beeped. Wheelchairs rolled through crowded hallways. She remembered the elderly Chinese woman sitting alone in the waiting room. Small, fragile, terrified. Nobody could understand her. The nurses were busy. The receptionist was frustrated. The woman clutched medical paperwork with trembling hands and kept repeating the same Mandarin phrase over and over. No one knew what she was saying, except Maya. Back then, she worked part-time at the hospital while attending interpreter classes at a community college. She had heard the woman's panic immediately. The phrase was simple. My husband. My husband. My husband. The woman's husband had collapsed in another department. She couldn't find him. Nobody understood. Maya had walked over, knelt beside her, and translated. Within minutes, the misunderstanding was solved. The elderly woman burst into tears and grabbed Maya's hands. Relief flooded her face. For Maya, it had been a small act, just helping someone, nothing more. But later that day, she was called into an administrator's office. The hospital accused her of operating outside her assigned role. There were liability concerns, protocol concerns, legal concerns. No one mentioned the frightened old woman. No one mentioned the problem she solved. They only mentioned policy. 2 weeks later, her position disappeared during budget cuts. At least that was the official explanation. The reality felt different. Maya never forgot the administrator's final words. You seem to forget your place. Your place. 3 words. 3 words that followed her for years. Your place. Not interpreter. Not student. Not professional. Not enough, always not enough. The memory faded. The restaurant returned. The chandeliers. The rain. The table. Charles. And suddenly Maya understood why she wasn't afraid. Because she had already lost things. Dreams, jobs, opportunities, pride. She had survived all of it. A millionaire's opinion couldn't take anything she hadn't already rebuilt herself. Charles mistook her silence for hesitation. His smile returned. That's what I thought. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Maya slowly turned toward him. That's interesting. His eyebrow lifted. What is? You think silence means someone has nothing to say? The room became still again. Charles leaned back. And what exactly do you have to say? For a moment, Maya looked down. Not at Charles. At the $20 bill still resting on the floor. The same bill that had become a symbol of the entire evening. Then she looked up. Past Charles, past Raymond, toward the windows, toward the reflection of Chicago glowing against the lake. She thought about her mother, Denise sitting at the kitchen table sorting medication bottles, trying to hide the worry in her eyes. She thought about Caleb pretending not to notice overdue tuition notices. She thought about every extra shift, every sacrifice, every reason she kept moving forward. Then she looked directly at Mr. Liang. The older investor sat perfectly still, waiting. Something in his expression told her he already knew, not what she would say, but who she was. And that mattered, because very few people ever took the time to find out. Across the room, Daniel Mercer felt his pulse pounding. He had owned restaurants for 20 years. He had seen arguments, breakups, business deals collapse, celebrity meltdowns. Nothing felt quite like this, because this wasn't really about language anymore. It was about dignity, about assumptions, about who gets listened to and who gets ignored. Outside, Henry Lawson remained in the black sedan. His driver checked the time. "You really think something's about to happen?" Henry never looked away from the restaurant. "It already is." "What do you mean?" Henry smiled faintly. "Most people think life changes during the big moments." The driver waited. Henry continued. "But usually, life changes during the small ones." Back inside, Maya finally spoke. Not in Mandarin. Not yet. In English. Calm. Measured. Every word clear. "You know what the funny thing is, Mr. Whitmore?" Charles smirked. "No. Tell me. You've spent the last hour trying to figure out whether I'm qualified." A few people exchanged glances. Maya continued. "But you never asked a single question." The smile on Charles's face weakened slightly. "You don't know where I went to school." Silence. "You don't know what languages I speak." More silence. "You don't know what jobs I've had." Charles shifted slightly. "You don't know what I've studied." The room listened. "You don't know who raised me." Margaret lowered her eyes. "You don't know what I've survived." The words landed harder than anyone expected, because they weren't angry. They were honest, and honesty can be far more uncomfortable than anger. Charles forced a laugh. "Then enlighten us." Maya held his gaze. For the first time all evening, she saw something flicker behind his confidence. Not fear, not yet. Uncertainty. Small, barely visible, but real. The kind that appears when a story you've already written about someone starts falling apart. Mr. Liang folded his hands together. Interested now. Very interested. Because he recognized something Charles didn't. Maya wasn't defending herself. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply standing in the truth. And truth is difficult to intimidate. The rain outside intensified. Wind swept across the lake. Inside, the tension grew heavier. Everyone could feel it. The investors, the diners, the staff, even Charles. Especially Charles. Because for the first time since entering the restaurant, he no longer controlled the room. And deep down, he knew it. What happened next would determine everything. The bet, the deal, the reputation of everyone involved. Maya slowly turned back toward Mr. Liang. The older man looked at her with quiet curiosity. Then he nodded once. A small gesture, almost invisible. An invitation. Permission. Respect. And Maya accepted it. The next words out of her mouth would stop the entire restaurant cold. She looked directly at Mr. Liang. Not at Charles. Not at the crowd. Not at the $20 bill on the floor. At Mr. Liang. The older investor sat perfectly still, his hands folded calmly on the white linen tablecloth. The rain tapped softly against the glass walls overlooking Lake Michigan. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the city. Then Maya spoke, in flawless Mandarin. "Mr. Liang, I apologize for the interruption to your dinner." Every head in the restaurant turned. Every conversation died. Every fork froze halfway to a mouth. The words flowed naturally, not slowly, not carefully. Naturally. The way language sounds when it belongs to someone. Maya continued. "The chef recommends the lake trout tonight. It's prepared with ginger and citrus. If you prefer something closer to the flavors you're familiar with, the duck is excellent as well." Mr. Liang's eyebrows rose immediately. His wife blinked. One of the younger investors actually sat forward in his chair. The difference was obvious. This wasn't memorized. This wasn't rehearsed. This wasn't a phrase learned from a travel app. This was real. Charles's smile disappeared. Completely. For a moment, he looked like someone had physically removed the floor beneath him. Maya continued speaking. Elegant, precise, comfortable. She explained the menu, the wine pairings, the preparation methods, the ingredients. Every sentence landed perfectly. Then she stopped. The silence afterward felt enormous. Mr. Liang stared at her. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled, not politely, genuinely. And when he responded in Mandarin, his voice carried a note of genuine surprise. "Where did you learn?" Several guests looked confused. They couldn't understand the conversation, but they understood the expressions, the energy, the shock. Maya answered in Mandarin, "From people who became family." Mr. Liang nodded slowly, then asked another question, a longer one, more complex. This time Maya answered immediately, without hesitation, without searching for words, without effort. The younger investors exchanged glances. One laughed softly in disbelief. The older woman beside Mr. Liang covered her mouth. Charles looked from face to face, and for the first time all night, he realized he no longer understood what was happening. The room belonged to Maya now, not him. Raymond leaned back slowly. His expression held something close to admiration. Margaret looked at Maya with open astonishment. Daniel Mercer nearly forgot to breathe. Across the dining room, several servers stood frozen near the kitchen entrance. Luis whispered, "No way." Another server nodded. "Way." Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, Henry Lawson smiled. He couldn't hear a word through the glass, but he didn't need to. The reactions told him everything. The driver glanced over. "You knew? No." Henry laughed softly. "But I'm enjoying finding out." Back inside, Charles finally found his voice. "Okay." His tone was forced, sharp, defensive. "Fine." The room turned toward him. He forced a smile. "So she speaks some Mandarin." Nobody agreed. Nobody disagreed. The silence itself became a judgment. Charles pressed forward. "That doesn't mean much." Mr. Liang slowly turned toward him. The look he gave Charles wasn't hostile. It was worse. Disappointed. A man who had expected better. Charles felt it immediately, and hated it. Maya remained calm. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. That somehow made everything harder for Charles, because she wasn't acting like a winner. She was simply existing, and winning anyway. Charles pointed toward her. Speaking a few sentences doesn't make someone an expert. Maya finally looked at him. "You're right." Charles blinked. The answer wasn't what he expected. Maya continued. Speaking a language doesn't make someone an expert. For a brief moment, relief crossed his face. Then she added, "Listening does." The room became silent again. Raymond closed his eyes. Margaret looked down. Mr. Liang smiled faintly. Charles's jaw tightened. Maya turned back toward the investors. Then she said something that changed everything. Again. Still in Mandarin. "Mr. Liang, would you like me to translate what you've been discussing with your team for the last 10 minutes? The smile vanished from Charles's face. Instantly. Mr. Liang's eyes widened slightly. The younger investors exchanged glances. One laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Charles spoke. "What are you talking about?" Maya answered calmly. "I mean the concerns you've been discussing regarding the waterfront project." The room froze. Charles's expression changed. Not much, but enough. Enough for Raymond to notice. Enough for Margaret to notice. Enough for Mr. Liang to notice. Fear. Tiny. Brief but real. Maya continued, "You've raised concerns about environmental protections." Mr. Liang nodded slowly. "You've discussed timeline pressures." Another nod. "And you've questioned whether community impact studies were completed properly." The younger investors stared. The older woman stared. Raymond stared. Daniel Mercer stared. The room had become completely silent. Charles looked trapped, because every statement was correct. Every one. Mr. Liang finally spoke in English. For everyone to hear. "She is correct." The words landed like thunder. Several diners openly gasped. Someone near the bar whispered, "Oh my God." Charles's grip tightened around his whiskey glass. Mr. Liang continued, "We have discussed those concerns." The older investor leaned back, and we were surprised Mr. Whitmore never addressed them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the musicians had stopped again. Maya hadn't just proven she spoke Mandarin. She had proven she understood the conversation Charles never knew was happening. Charles swallowed. Hard. Then laughed. A forced laugh. An uncomfortable laugh. The laugh of a man scrambling for control. Interesting trick. No one joined him. No one smiled. No one rescued him. The silence grew heavier. Mr. Liang looked at Maya, then at Charles, then back at Maya. For the first time all evening, his attention rested completely on her, not on the developer, not on the deal, on the waitress, because something had become obvious. The most valuable person at the table wasn't sitting in a tailored suit. She was standing beside it wearing a black apron. Charles saw that realization happen, and it terrified him, because money had always solved problems. Status had always created advantages. Power had always restored order. But none of those things seemed to be working tonight. And the worst part? The night wasn't even halfway over. Across the street, Henry Lawson watched through the rain-streaked window. His smile faded into something more thoughtful. Because what he was witnessing wasn't merely intelligence. It wasn't merely talent. It was character meeting opportunity. And sometimes that combination changed lives. Back inside, Charles slowly set down his glass. The muscles in his jaw flexed. His pride was wounded. His reputation was slipping. The room was no longer under his control, and men like Charles rarely accepted defeat quietly. Very rarely. He looked at Maya, then toward the investors, then back at Maya. A new plan was already forming, a more dangerous one. Because if speaking Mandarin wasn't enough to expose her, he would find something that could. And when he spoke again, Everyone in the restaurant sensed the night was about to become even more explosive. Much more. Charles Whitmore slowly rose from his chair. Not completely, just enough to command attention. The room fell silent again. The investors watched him. The diners watched him. Even the kitchen staff standing near the swinging doors stopped pretending to work. Charles forced a smile. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man trying to recover ground he had already lost. Well, he adjusted his suit jacket. Congratulations. The word sounded painful coming from him. You speak Mandarin. Nobody responded. Charles laughed softly. But let's not get carried away. There it was. The next attack. The next attempt to reclaim control. Raymond closed his eyes briefly. Margaret sighed. Mr. Liang remained perfectly calm. Maya simply waited. Charles pointed toward her. Being conversational isn't the same thing as understanding business. The room listened. It's one thing to order dinner. He picked up his whiskey glass. It's another thing entirely to understand international contracts. The younger investors exchanged glances. Maya remained silent. Charles mistook her silence for uncertainty. That mistake would cost him. He reached inside his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick folder, then placed it on the table. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Every eye followed it. What do you have there? Raymond asked. Charles smiled. A draft agreement. Mr. Liang's expression darkened slightly. The investors immediately recognized the document. The preliminary investment package. The same package their legal teams had been reviewing for weeks. Charles slid the folder across the table. Toward Maya. Since you're apparently full of surprises tonight. His eyes narrowed. Translate this. The challenge landed like a stone thrown into still water. Ripples spread through the room. Several diners openly turned their chairs. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Maya looked down at the folder, then back at Charles. What part? His smile widened. The part you can actually understand. A few uncomfortable faces appeared around the room. The insult was obvious. Even now. Even after everything. Charles still couldn't stop underestimating her. Mr. Liang spoke quietly. Mr. Whitmore. But Charles wasn't finished. No. He held up a hand. You've already proven you can speak. He tapped the folder. Now let's see whether you understand. The challenge hung in the air. Heavy, dangerous. Because this wasn't restaurant Mandarin anymore. This wasn't conversation. This was business. Contracts. Legal language. Investment terminology. The kind of language designed to confuse people. Charles was betting on something specific. He believed Maya's knowledge had limits. He believed he had finally found them. The room waited. Maya slowly opened the folder. The pages rustled softly beneath her fingertips. She scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Outside, rain streaked down the windows. Inside, 60 people watched a waitress read a multi-million-dollar investment document. The image itself felt surreal. Charles crossed his arms, confident again, certain again. This was his arena, his world, his language, his rules. At least that's what he thought. Maya continued reading, line after line, clause after clause. The longer she read, the more something changed in her expression. Not confusion, not fear. Focus, deep focus, the kind that made everything else disappear. Suddenly, she wasn't in Lakeshore Terrace anymore. She was 12 years old again, sitting inside Mrs. Chen's laundromat. The hum of washing machines filled the room. Steam drifted from dryers. Customers came and went. And in the corner, Mrs. Chen sat beside her with an old Chinese newspaper, patiently teaching her, character by character, word by word, hour after hour. Most afternoons, Maya completed homework there while her mother worked. Mrs. Chen had no children of her own. Eventually, she treated Maya like family. She taught her language, stories, history, patience. When Maya turned 16, Mrs. Chen began helping her read more difficult texts, government forms, business notices, medical documents, anything she could find. You never know what knowledge becomes useful later, Mrs. Chen always said. At the time, Maya thought she was talking about school. Now she realized Mrs. Chen had been preparing her for life. Back in the restaurant, Maya reached the middle of the document. Then she stopped. The room tightened. Charles smiled. There it is. He could almost see the thought forming. The limit. The mistake. The failure. Maya read the paragraph again. Slower. More carefully. Then she turned another page. Mr. Liang watched closely. Something had caught her attention. He could tell. And suddenly, he was no longer curious whether she could read the document. He was curious about what she had found. Maya continued reading. A minute passed. Then another. The restaurant remained frozen. Finally, she looked up. Charles leaned forward. Ready. Hungry for a mistake. Well? Maya closed the folder. Slowly. Carefully. Then she asked a question. A very simple question. One that instantly changed the mood. Who translated the English version? Charles blinked. What? The English version. She looked directly at him. Who translated it? The confidence in his face faltered. Only slightly. But enough. Raymond noticed. So did Margaret. Mr. Liang noticed too. Charles forced a laugh. What difference does that make? Maya placed one finger on the document. This section. The room became silent again. She opened the folder to a specific page, then pointed. The Environmental Compliance Clause. Mr. Liang sat forward immediately. Charles did not, because suddenly he already knew where this was going, and he didn't like it. Not one bit. Maya looked at the investors, then at Charles, then back at the page. The Mandarin version and the English version don't say the same thing. The room exploded with whispers. Mr. Liang's associates immediately exchanged glances. Raymond straightened in his chair. Margaret looked shocked. Charles's jaw tightened. Maya continued. The English version suggests investors lose their withdrawal rights only after a final regulatory violation. She tapped the page. But the Mandarin version allows those rights to disappear much earlier under a broader interpretation. Mr. Liang's eyes widened. One associate grabbed the document. Another leaned closer. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air heavier. Because this wasn't about language anymore. This was about money. A lot of money. Maya continued. If the project causes environmental damage near the residential district by the lake, she paused. Investors could lose protections they believe they still have. Nobody breathed. Mr. Liang slowly took the folder, read the section himself, then looked toward Charles. The disappointment on his face was unmistakable. Charles swallowed. Hard. For the first time all evening, he had no immediate response. No clever comeback. No insult. No joke. Nothing. Because the waitress he had mocked wasn't simply speaking Mandarin. She had just identified a problem inside a $90 million deal. a problem nobody expected her to see, and judging by the look on Mr. Liang's face, a problem that might be very real. The room remained silent. Every person inside understood one thing. The night had just become far bigger than a bet, much bigger. And Charles Whitmore was beginning to realize he might not be fighting to save his pride anymore. He might be fighting to save the entire deal. The silence inside Lakeshore Terrace felt almost unnatural. Outside, rain slid down the windows in shimmering rivers of silver. Inside, 60 people sat frozen around white tablecloths and candlelight. Nobody cared about dinner anymore. Nobody cared about dessert. Nobody cared about wine. Every eye remained locked on the table at the center of the room. The table where a waitress had just uncovered a problem buried inside a $90 million investment agreement. Charles Whitmore forced himself to smile. It wasn't convincing. Not anymore. The confidence that had filled the room when he arrived was beginning to crack, just enough for everyone to see. That's a legal interpretation. His voice sounded tighter than before. Maya remained calm. It is. So you don't actually know whether it's a problem. Raymond slowly turned toward him. The statement sounded weak. Even Charles seemed to hear it. Maya glanced at the document again. Then she looked at Mr. Liang. May I? The older investor nodded immediately. She opened the agreement to the same page. The paper rustled softly. Every sound in the room seemed amplified now. The turning pages, the rain, the faint hum of air conditioning, even breathing. Maya pointed toward a paragraph. This section references environmental compliance thresholds. One of Mr. Liang's associates stood and moved closer. The younger man adjusted his glasses, read the paragraph, then looked up sharply. Mr. Liang took the document himself. His eyes moved across the page, slowly, carefully. Then he flipped to the English version, compared them. Once, twice, a third time. The older investor's expression darkened. Raymond noticed immediately. Margaret noticed too. Charles pretended not to, but everyone could see the tension gathering around him. Finally, Mr. Liang spoke. Not to Maya. To Charles. Why wasn't this brought to our attention? The question landed heavily. Charles leaned back. There are multiple drafts. That's not what I asked. Mr. Liang's voice remained polite, which somehow made it worse. I asked why the language differs. Nobody spoke. The restaurant had become silent enough to hear ice settling inside glasses. Charles cleared his throat. Our legal team reviewed everything. One of the Chinese investors shook his head. We specifically asked about this clause last week. Raymond's eyes moved toward Charles, slowly, almost reluctantly, because now he remembered the meeting, the emails, the discussion, the warnings. The concern had been raised. Charles had dismissed it. The realization appeared on Raymond's face, and Maya saw it. So did Mr. Liang. Charles suddenly felt cornered, a feeling he despised. His entire career had been built on control. Control of meetings, control of negotiations, control of perception. Now that control was slipping away. And it was slipping away because of a woman he had dismissed as unqualified less than an hour ago. The irony burned. Maya closed the folder gently. She wasn't trying to embarrass him. That was the strange part. Every person in the room could feel it. She wasn't attacking. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't performing. She was simply telling the truth. And truth was proving devastating enough. Mr. Liang folded his hands. I appreciate your honesty, Miss Brooks, Maya nodded. Thank you. The older investor continued. Most people would have stayed silent. She smiled faintly. I've never been very good at staying silent when something matters. A few people laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was true. Across the room, several diners exchanged glances. The story was spreading from table to table. Phones remained tucked away. Nobody wanted to record. They wanted to witness. There was a difference, so some moments belong on screens, others belong in memory. This felt like one of those moments. Near the kitchen entrance, Luis whispered to another server, "Can you believe this?" The other server shook his head. "Honestly, what? I don't think we're even watching the main event anymore." Luis frowned. "What do you mean?" The server nodded toward Maya. "I think we're watching someone's life change." Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, Henry Lawson remained inside the black sedan. His driver had long since stopped asking questions. Both men watched through the rain. The glow from the restaurant reflected across the wet street. Henry leaned back thoughtfully. He remembered another evening decades earlier. Another room. Another deal. Another young employee nobody respected. Back then, Henry himself had been the overlooked person. The son of a mechanic. The kid nobody expected much from. The man who sat at the wrong table wearing the wrong suit. He remembered the feeling perfectly. The loneliness. The dismissal. The assumptions. And he remembered something else. One person. One person who had believed in him before anyone else did. Sometimes a single moment changed everything. Maybe tonight was becoming one of those moments. Back inside, Charles finally stood. This time completely. His chair scraped against the floor. Several people jumped. The sound shattered the quiet. "I think we're getting distracted." Nobody answered. Charles looked around the room, trying to recover authority, trying to reclaim territory, trying to become the most important person at the table again. "The purpose of tonight is the deal." Mr. Liang looked at him calmly. "Exactly." The word struck harder than Charles expected, because everyone understood what it meant. The deal. The very thing Charles wanted to protect. The very thing Maya had just helped expose. Raymond slowly stood as well. For years he had followed Charles's lead. For years he had trusted his judgment. For years they had built projects together. But tonight something felt different, something uncomfortable, something impossible to ignore. He looked at Maya, then at Charles, then back at the contract. Finally he spoke, quietly. "Maybe we should review everything again." Charles stared at him. The betrayal hit harder than any comment from Maya, because it came from someone he trusted, someone who knew him, someone who had built an empire beside him. "You too?" Raymond sighed. "This isn't about sides. It feels like it. It's about facts." Charles laughed bitterly. "No." He shook his head. "It's about a waitress embarrassing everyone." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. He saw it immediately. The disappointment on Margaret's face, the irritation on Raymond's face, the expressionless calm of Mr. Liang. Most of all, the complete absence of reaction from Maya. She didn't look hurt, didn't look angry, didn't look offended. She simply looked tired. As if she had heard versions of those words her entire life. And maybe she had. That realization unsettled several people in the room, including Margaret. For the first time all evening, she saw Maya not as an employee, but as a person. A person who had likely spent years proving herself to people determined not to see her. The thought stayed with her. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer approached cautiously. The owner rarely inserted himself into guest disputes. But tonight wasn't normal. Nothing about tonight was normal. He looked at Maya, then at Charles, then at Mr. Liang. Finally he spoke. "Miss Brooks." Maya turned. "Yes, sir?" Daniel smiled. A genuine smile. The first one she'd seen from him all night. "I think everyone here owes you a thank you." The room became still. Then several people nodded. A few diners even quietly applauded. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to acknowledge what everyone knew. Without Maya, nobody would have caught the problem. Without Maya, the deal might have moved forward unchanged. Without Maya, the truth might have remained hidden. Charles heard the applause, tiny though it was, and something inside him snapped. Not publicly, not visibly, internally, because he could feel the room moving away from him and toward her. That was the thing he could never tolerate. Being overlooked, being replaced, being outshined, especially by someone he had already judged, especially by someone he had already dismissed. His eyes settled on Maya. Cold now, calculating. A new strategy was forming. One final attempt, one last chance to prove she didn't belong at the table. And when he finally spoke again, his voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that usually arrives right before a storm. Because Charles Whitmore had decided on something dangerous. If conversation couldn't expose Maya, if contracts couldn't expose Maya, then he would force her into a test no self-taught waitress could possibly pass. Or so he believed. And before the night was over, every person in the restaurant would be watching. Again. The tension inside Lakeshore Terrace felt almost visible, like static electricity before a lightning strike. Nobody had resumed their meals. Steaks cooled on plates. Wine sat untouched. Candles flickered softly across white tablecloths. Outside, Chicago glowed beneath rain-soaked streets. Inside, the evening had transformed into something none of the guests would ever forget. Charles Whitmore stood beside his chair. His expression had settled into something colder, more controlled, more dangerous. The anger was no longer visible, and that made it worse, because Charles had stopped reacting. Now he was calculating. Maya recognized the look immediately. She had seen it before, not from millionaires, from people determined to prove they were right at any cost. Charles slowly adjusted his cufflinks, then looked toward Daniel Mercer, the restaurant owner. "I think this has gone far enough." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Charles pointed toward Maya. "I mean your employee has disrupted a business dinner." The room reacted immediately. Not with words, with expressions, because everyone knew that wasn't true. Maya hadn't disrupted anything. She had answered questions, nothing more. Mr. Liang folded his hands calmly. His silence alone carried enough meaning. Charles continued. "I'd like her removed from the table." Several diners exchanged stunned looks. Margaret lowered her eyes. Raymond shook his head slowly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. 20 years of running restaurants had taught him something important. Sometimes the customer wasn't right. Sometimes leadership meant saying no. He looked at Maya, then at Charles, then at the investors. Finally he spoke. "I'm not removing her." The words landed like a hammer. Charles blinked. "What?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I'm not removing her." The silence deepened. Charles stared at him, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. "You understand how much business I bring to this place?" Daniel nodded. "I do. And you're willing to risk that?" Daniel glanced toward Maya, then back to Charles. "You asked whether she could speak Mandarin." A pause. "Turns out she can." A few diners smiled. Charles didn't. Daniel continued. You challenged her understanding. Another pause. Turns out she understood more than anyone expected. The room grew quieter still. Daniel folded his hands. So no. I'm not removing her. For the first time all evening, Charles found himself completely alone. Not literally, but emotionally. No one was standing behind him anymore. Not Daniel, not Raymond, not the investors, not even Margaret. The realization hit him harder than he expected. Across the room, whispers spread again. People weren't talking about Charles anymore. They were talking about Maya, the waitress, the woman everyone had underestimated, the woman who somehow kept proving people wrong. Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, a black sedan finally pulled away from the curb. Its headlights swept across the wet pavement. The vehicle crossed the street, then stopped directly in front of Lakeshore Terrace. The doorman immediately straightened. Recognition flashed across his face. Inside the sedan, Henry Lawson looked toward the entrance. His driver opened the door. Rain tapped against the umbrella overhead. Henry stepped onto the sidewalk. His worn coat was gone. The old baseball cap was gone. The tired appearance was gone. Now he wore a tailored charcoal suit, polished shoes, a silver watch, quiet confidence. Not the confidence of someone trying to impress people. The confidence of someone who no longer needed to. The doorman's eyes widened. Mr. Lawson? Henry nodded politely. Good evening. The doorman rushed to open the entrance. Inside the restaurant, nobody noticed yet. Everyone remained focused on the conflict unfolding around Charles's table. Everyone except Daniel. The owner happened to glance toward the front doors, and immediately froze, his face drained of color. Charles noticed. What now? Daniel didn't answer. He was staring toward the entrance. So were several staff members. One by one, heads began turning. The room shifted. A ripple moving across 60 people. Conversations stopped. Eyes widened. And then the doors opened. Henry Lawson entered. The reaction was immediate. A woman near the bar gasped. A businessman stood halfway from his chair. Two servers exchanged shocked looks, because almost everyone knew exactly who Henry Lawson was. Hotel magnate, real estate investor, philanthropist, one of the wealthiest men in Illinois. The man rumored to be acquiring multiple hospitality properties throughout Chicago, including perhaps Lakeshore Terrace. Daniel moved immediately. Mr. Lawson. Henry smiled. Daniel. They shook hands. The room watched. Charles stared, confused, then intrigued, then surprised. Because Henry Lawson rarely appeared in public, and certainly not without notice. What is he doing here? Raymond whispered. Nobody knew, not yet. Henry exchanged a few quiet words with Daniel. Then his eyes moved through the room, slowly, patiently, until they landed on Maya. For a brief moment, neither moved. Recognition flashed across her face. Not complete recognition. Confusion first, then memory, then disbelief. The bus stop, the rain, the soup, the scarf, the old man. The room disappeared around her. The realization hit all at once. Henry smiled, a warm smile, the same one he'd given her hours earlier, only now everyone else could see it. Maya stared. You. Henry nodded. Hello, Maya. The entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing. Charles looked between them. What is this? Nobody answered. Not immediately. Because nobody understood. Henry walked forward. calmly. The crowd parted without realizing it. Eventually, he stopped beside Charles's table. Then he looked directly at Maya. "I've been hoping we'd meet again." The words sounded simple, but the emotion behind them wasn't. Maya could barely process what was happening. The soaked stranger from the bus stop, the lonely old man she fed, the man she gave her scarf to, the man she thought she'd never see again, one of the richest people in the city. Charles finally spoke. "You know each other?" Henry turned toward him. "Not exactly." Then he looked back at Maya, though she was kind enough to help me when she believed I was nobody. The sentence changed everything. The room reacted immediately. Several people sat forward. Margaret's eyes widened. Raymond looked fascinated. Mr. Liang became intensely interested. Charles frowned. "What do you mean?" Henry's smile faded slightly. 3 hours ago, I was sitting alone in the rain." He glanced at Maya. Most people walked past. Silence. Maya didn't. The room listened. She brought me hot food. Another pause. Called me a taxi. Another. And gave me her scarf. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The impact spread slowly, because everyone understood what Henry was really saying. Maya hadn't helped him because he was wealthy. She didn't know he was wealthy. She thought he was a stranger, a forgotten old man, someone with nothing to offer her. And she helped him anyway. Mr. Liang slowly smiled. Daniel looked proud. Several diners lowered their eyes, as if examining their own choices. Meanwhile, Charles felt something unfamiliar. Unease. Real unease. Because the narrative of the evening had just changed again. It wasn't about language anymore. It wasn't about contracts anymore. It wasn't even about the bet. Now it was about character. And character was the one contest Charles was losing badly. Henry looked around the room, then spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "The most impressive thing Maya Brooks did tonight wasn't speaking Mandarin." The room became silent. Henry's eyes returned to her. It was treating a stranger with dignity when she had absolutely nothing to gain. The words landed harder than applause, harder than compliments, harder than money, because everyone knew they were true. Charles looked trapped, and somewhere deep inside, he realized something terrifying. The waitress he had tried to humiliate wasn't merely winning the room. She was winning respect. The one thing money couldn't buy back once it was lost. And standing beside her now was a billionaire who had witnessed everything. Every insult, every assumption, every mistake. The storm Charles feared was finally arriving, and Henry Lawson hadn't even revealed the biggest surprise yet. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The entire restaurant seemed suspended between two moments. The first was the world Charles Whitmore had walked into earlier that evening. A world where money controlled conversations, where status settled arguments, and where people like Maya Brooks were expected to remain invisible. The second was whatever this had become. Something different. Something Charles no longer understood. Henry Lawson stood beside the table, calm and composed. Rain shimmered beyond the windows behind him. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement outside, turning the streets into rivers of gold and silver. Inside, every eye moved between Henry, Maya, and Charles, waiting. Charles finally cleared his throat. "That's a touching story." The words came out sharper than intended. Nobody reacted. Not even Henry. Charles continued. "I'm glad she helped you. Still nothing. But kindness and professional expertise aren't the same thing." There it was. The last defense. The last place he could retreat. If Maya couldn't be defeated through character, perhaps she could still be defeated through credentials. Henry watched him quietly. Mr. Liang watched him quietly. Even Margaret watched him quietly. Charles suddenly realized nobody was helping him anymore. Nobody was interrupting. Nobody was agreeing. He was standing alone, and that only made him more determined. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Raymond asked. Charles didn't answer immediately. He tapped the screen several times, then looked directly at Maya. "You've impressed everyone." His smile returned. Thin, controlled, dangerous. "You speak Mandarin." He nodded. "You found an issue in a contract." Another nod. "Fine." The room listened carefully. "But one thing still bothers me." Maya met his gaze. "What?" Charles slipped the phone onto the table. "A real professional doesn't just speak a language." The smile widened. "A real professional can prove it." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Daniel Mercer felt his stomach tighten. Henry's expression remained unreadable. Mr. Liang leaned back slightly. Charles pressed a button. The screen lit up. A video call began connecting. Several people exchanged confused glances. Then a woman appeared on the screen. Mid-50s, professional, bookshelves behind her, sharp eyes, confident posture. Charles folded his arms. Dr. Rebecca Hart. The name immediately caught Mr. Liang's attention. One of the investors murmured softly. Even Raymond looked surprised. Dr. Hart was a respected language consultant who worked with international legal firms and medical institutions. She wasn't famous, but inside translation circles, her reputation was enormous. The woman adjusted her glasses. "Charles, thank you for joining us." She smiled politely, then noticed the crowd. "The situation sounds unusual." "Very." Charles glanced at Maya. "I need an independent evaluation." The room understood immediately. A ripple of whispers spread through nearby tables. Maya remained calm, but inside her pulse quickened. This was different. Not because she doubted herself, because suddenly everything had become public. Every sacrifice, every late night, every lesson from Mrs. Chen, every dream she'd put on hold, everything was standing in front of a jury. Dr. Hart listened as Charles briefly explained the evening. The bet, the language, the contract, the investors, the room. When he finished, she raised an eyebrow, then looked directly at Maya through the screen. "Miss Brooks?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand what he's asking?" "I do." Dr. Hart studied her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the older woman smiled faintly. "Do you want to do this?" The question surprised everyone, especially Charles. Maya thought about it. For a brief moment, she saw her mother's face. Denise sitting at the kitchen table sorting medication. She saw Caleb studying late into the night. She saw Mrs. Chen patiently tracing Chinese characters across old newspapers. She saw the hospital hallway, the community kitchen, the bus stop, the rain. She remembered every person who had invested something in her, every person who believed she was capable of more. Then she looked up. Yes. The answer was immediate. No hesitation. No uncertainty. The room grew still. Dr. Hart nodded. "All right." She opened a file on her screen. "We'll keep this simple." Charles smiled again. Finally. At last. A battlefield he understood. Or so he thought. Dr. Hart began with a legal passage. Dense language, complex terminology, investment clauses, regulatory wording. the kind of text designed to make ordinary people uncomfortable. She read it aloud in Mandarin, then stopped. Translate. Maya listened carefully. The words flowed through her mind, not as sounds, as meaning, as structure, as patterns she had been learning since childhood. Then she answered, sentence by sentence, clause by clause, clear, accurate, natural. Several investors exchanged looks. Mr. Liang smiled. Raymond slowly sat back in his chair. Dr. Hart nodded. Excellent. Charles's smile faded slightly. Dr. Hart continued. The second passage was medical, more difficult, technical, specialized. A description of symptoms, diagnoses, treatment protocols, and pharmaceutical instructions. As the words filled the room, Maya felt something unexpected. Not fear. Memory. The memory of translating prescriptions for elderly immigrants at free clinics. The memory of helping frightened families understand what doctors were saying. The memory of the dream she never completely abandoned. Medical interpreter. The dream still lived somewhere inside her. Waiting. Dr. Hart finished reading. The room waited. Maya translated. Carefully, confidently. Then she reached a phrase. A difficult one. Rare. Specialized. For the first time all evening, she paused. Only a second. But everyone noticed. Charles leaned forward immediately. There, the crack, the mistake, the limit. He could almost feel victory returning. Maya closed her eyes, just briefly. Then another memory appeared. Mrs. Chen laughing beside her in a small clinic years ago, pointing to a medical form, explaining the meaning behind a difficult phrase, teaching her how language worked beneath the surface. Not memorization, understanding. Maya opened her eyes, then continued. Perfectly. Dr. Hart blinked. Actually blinked. Then looked back down at her notes. Correct. The room exhaled. Charles did not. His jaw tightened. Because the test wasn't ending. It was getting worse. And somewhere deep inside he was beginning to suspect the truth. The truth that frightened him most. Maybe Maya Brooks wasn't getting lucky. Maybe she really belonged at this table. And if that was true, everything he believed about her had been wrong from the beginning. The final challenge still remained, and it would determine far more than a bet. It would determine whether the entire room saw Maya as extraordinary or undeniable. The restaurant had never been quieter. Not during celebrity visits, not during business negotiations, not during marriage proposals or retirement celebrations. Nothing compared to this. 60 people sat frozen beneath crystal chandeliers while rain whispered against the windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Every eye remained fixed on the phone resting at the center of Charles Whitmore's table. Dr. Rebecca Hart adjusted her glasses on the screen. Her expression had changed. She no longer looked skeptical. She looked impressed. And that frightened Charles more than anything else. The final challenge remained. The hardest one. The challenge he had been counting on. The challenge he believed would finally expose Maya. Dr. Hart folded her hands. The final section is different. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It isn't legal. A pause. It isn't medical. Another pause. It's cultural. Mr. Liang immediately sat forward. So did his wife. Raymond's attention sharpened. Even Henry Lawson watched more closely. Dr. Hart continued. I'm going to read a passage adapted from classical Chinese literature. The room listened. Not modern Mandarin. She smiled slightly. the kind of text most fluent speakers never encounter. Charles felt hope return. Finally, this was it. No laundromat lessons, no neighborhood conversations, no practical experience. This required years of specialized education, academic training, formal study, the very credentials Maya lacked. Dr. Hart began reading. The words flowed through the speaker, elegant, ancient, layered with metaphor and historical meaning. Most people in the restaurant couldn't understand a single word, but they could hear the complexity, the rhythm, the density, the challenge. When she finished, silence returned. The room waited. Charles leaned forward. Maya remained still. For several seconds she said nothing. The pause stretched, long enough for Charles's confidence to grow, long enough for him to imagine the evening finally turning back in his favor. Then Maya closed her eyes, not because she was struggling, because she was listening to the memory beneath the words. Years ago, Mrs. Chen had once told her something. Language wasn't vocabulary. Language was people, culture, history, emotion. The words themselves mattered, but the meaning behind them mattered more. Maya opened her eyes. Then she began, not translating word for word, translating meaning, emotion, context. She explained the metaphor, the symbolism, the deeper message hidden beneath the literal language. The room listened. Even those who didn't understand Chinese felt it, because her voice carried certainty, grace, understanding. She wasn't reciting. She was interpreting. When she finished, nobody spoke, not immediately. The silence felt sacred somehow. Then Dr. Hart slowly removed her glasses. The movement alone made several people nervous. She stared at Maya through the screen. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Finally, she smiled. A genuine smile. The kind professionals reserve for rare moments. In 23 years of translation work, the room held its breath. I have never met someone without formal certification who performs at this level. A ripple moved through the restaurant. Charles felt his stomach drop. Dr. Hart continued. Miss Brooks, her voice softened. You possess extraordinary linguistic ability. Silence. More importantly, you understand people. Another pause. And that cannot be taught. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then she added the words that ended everything. You passed. The room exploded. Not loudly at first. A few gasps, a few laughs, a few disbelieving smiles. Then applause. Real applause. Spontaneous, heartfelt. The sound spread from table to table like a wave. People stood, one by one, then dozens. The entire dining room rose to its feet. Charles remained seated, alone. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Maya stood in the center of it all. A black apron, a tired smile, a life she barely recognized anymore. And then something unexpected happened. Charles reached into his jacket. The applause gradually softened. People watched. He pulled out a checkbook. The room became quiet again. Slowly, deliberately. He uncapped a pen. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody mocked him. Nobody celebrated. Everyone simply watched. The scratching sound of ink against paper seemed unusually loud. Charles finished writing, tore out the check, folded it once, then placed it on the table. $100,000. The amount sat there in black ink. Real. Undeniable. The bet was over. Charles looked up at Maya. His expression was difficult to read. Not anger, not humiliation. Something more complicated. Maybe regret. Maybe realization. Maybe both. Maya walked toward the table. The room watched every step. She picked up the check, looked at it briefly, then folded it carefully. The applause began again. But Maya wasn't finished. Her eyes dropped toward the floor, toward something everyone had forgotten. The $20 bill. Still there. Still lying beside Charles's chair. The same bill that had started everything. The same bill he had tossed toward her. The same bill he expected her to pick up. Slowly, Maya bent down. The room grew silent again. She picked it up, straightened, then placed the bill directly in front of Charles. Her voice was calm, gentle, almost kind. "Keep it." The room froze. Maya smiled slightly. "You might need it more than I do." For 1 second, nobody reacted. Then laughter erupted. Not cruel laughter. Relieved laughter. The kind that appears after hours of tension. Even Raymond laughed. Even Margaret smiled. Even Mr. Liang shook his head in admiration. Charles stared at the $20 bill, then lowered his eyes. For the first time all evening, he had no response. None. Henry Lawson stepped forward. The room gradually quieted. His presence carried weight, not because he demanded attention, because he rarely needed to. He looked at Maya, then spoke clearly. "Miss Brooks." Maya turned. Henry reached into his pocket, removed a business card, but he didn't hand it over immediately. Instead, he studied her, the same way someone studies an opportunity that feels larger than business. "You know," a faint smile appeared. "When I sat in that rain tonight, I thought I'd simply met a kind stranger." The room listened. "I didn't realize I'd met one of the most talented people in Chicago." Maya looked genuinely embarrassed. Several guests smiled. Henry continued. "My hotel group is opening a new international hospitality division." Raymond raised an eyebrow. Mr. Liang looked interested. Henry's eyes remained on Maya. "We serve guests from all over the world." A pause. "We need someone who understands language." Another pause. "Culture." Another. "And people." The room understood where this was going. Several guests leaned forward. Henry held out the card. "I'd like to offer you a position." The restaurant went completely silent. Again. Maya stared, not comprehending. Henry smiled. Director of International Guest Relations. The title alone sounded unreal, but he wasn't finished. "We'll also cover your education." Maya blinked. "What?" Henry nodded. "The interpreter program." Her breath caught. The dream. The dream she buried years ago. The dream she thought was gone. The dream she sacrificed for hospital bills and rent payments. Henry continued. Full scholarship. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Charles looked stunned. Maya felt tears threatening. She fought them back, not because she was ashamed, because she couldn't believe this was happening. Before she could answer, another voice entered. "Mr. Liang." The investor stood, calmly, respectfully. Then he looked at Henry, then at Maya, then at the room. "My company has one condition." Everyone listened. "If we move forward with this project..." A pause. "Miss Brooks joins the advisory team." The room erupted again. Applause, cheers, disbelief. The impossible kept becoming reality. Maya stood frozen, $100,000 in one hand, Henry's card in the other, a future she never imagined unfolding in front of her. But one final decision remained, and what she chose to do next would reveal exactly why she had become the most respected person in the room. Not because of language, not because of intelligence, because of her heart. For a few seconds, Maya Brooks couldn't speak. The applause faded into a soft murmur around her. The restaurant lights reflected against crystal glasses and polished silverware. Outside, the rain had finally begun to ease. Chicago shimmered beyond the windows like a city washed clean. Inside Lakeshore Terrace, an entirely different kind of storm had ended. Maya stood holding a $100,000 check in one hand and Henry Lawson's business card in the other. Only hours earlier, she had been another waitress working a double shift, another woman trying to stretch every dollar, another daughter worrying about medical bills, another sister wondering how to help her family survive one more month. Now everyone in the room was looking at her, waiting. Henry watched patiently. Mr. Liang watched patiently. Even Charles Whitmore watched. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who had spent the evening demanding proof was now waiting for Maya's answer. She looked down at the check. $100,000. More money than she had ever seen in one place. More money than she had imagined holding in her hands. For a brief moment, she thought about the endless stack of medical bills sitting on her mother's kitchen table. The dialysis appointments, the prescriptions, the overdue notices hidden beneath piles of paperwork. She thought about Caleb. Working nights while attending classes. Pretending everything was fine. Pretending he wasn't exhausted. Pretending he wasn't worried. She thought about all the children she'd met at the community kitchen. Kids translating documents for their parents. Kids speaking two languages, yet feeling invisible in both. Kids who reminded her of herself. And suddenly, the answer became clear. The room waited. Maya finally smiled. A real smile. The kind that starts deep inside. She looked at Henry first. "Thank you." Her voice trembled slightly. Not from fear. From gratitude. Henry nodded. Then she looked toward Mr. Liang. "And thank you." The investor smiled warmly. Then Maya looked around the room. At Daniel. At the servers. At the cooks peeking through the kitchen doors. At Margaret. At Raymond. At strangers she had never met before tonight. People who had witnessed her worst moment. And her best, she took a slow breath. "I'm going to use half of this money to help my mother." The room immediately applauded. Several guests nodded. Others smiled. Maya continued. "And the other half," she paused, "I'm going to use it for people like me." The room quieted. Curious, interested, hopeful. Maya looked toward the windows, toward the city, toward the neighborhoods most people drove past without seeing. The kids nobody asks questions about. A pause. The ones translating for their parents. Another pause. The ones learning languages in grocery stores, laundromats, churches, community centers, and apartment kitchens. Mr. Liang smiled. Henry smiled. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. Maya continued. "I want to create a scholarship fund." The room erupted into applause again, but she wasn't finished. "I want those kids to know their talent matters." The applause grew louder. "I want them to know they belong in every room they walk into." A standing ovation began again, this time stronger than before, more emotional, because everyone understood. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about possibility. Henry Lawson stepped forward. The applause slowly faded. He looked at Maya, then smiled. Then I'd like to make the first contribution. The room gasped. Maya blinked. What? Henry laughed softly. You heard me. A pause. I'll match the amount. The room exploded. Several people stood immediately. Daniel Mercer laughed in disbelief. Raymond shook his head. Mr. Liang smiled wider. Then the investor spoke. So will I. Another wave of applause. The room had become electric, hopeful, alive. Margaret surprised everyone next. She stepped forward quietly, looked at Maya, then handed her a small card. My family's foundation supports educational programs. Maya stared. Margaret smiled sadly. I'd like to help. The gesture wasn't large, but it meant something. Because sometimes the most important acts aren't dramatic. They're personal. Across the room, Raymond Cross stood, then walked toward Maya. For years, he had helped build Charles Whitmore's empire. Tonight, he felt like he had learned more from a waitress than from 100 board meetings. He handed her his card. If you ever need advice, a pause, call me. Maya accepted it. More cards followed. A nonprofit director, a language school owner, an attorney, a hospital administrator, one after another. Opportunities appeared where none had existed before. By the end, a small stack rested beside her. The room had transformed from an audience into a community, and standing alone near the edge of it all was Charles Whitmore. Nobody hated him, nobody mocked him. That somehow made the moment harder. Charles stared at the $20 bill still resting on the table. The bill looked smaller now, almost ridiculous, a symbol of everything he had gotten wrong. For a long time he said nothing. Then finally he walked toward Maya. The room fell quiet. Everyone watched. Charles stopped in front of her. The silence stretched. Then he spoke. I underestimated you. No excuses, no explanations, no defense, just the truth. Maya listened. Charles glanced around the room, then back at her. That's going to cost me more than $100,000. A faint smile touched Maya's face. Charles nodded once, then stepped back. The moment wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Sometimes growth looks quiet. Sometimes accountability sounds simple. And sometimes the biggest victory is hearing the truth spoken aloud. A few minutes later, the evening finally began winding down. Guests returned to conversations. The musicians resumed playing. Servers cleared tables. The city continued moving beyond the windows. Life went on. But not quite the same way. Before leaving, Henry stopped beside Maya one last time. You know something? She smiled. What? The best investment I made tonight wasn't a business deal. Maya laughed softly. Henry nodded toward her. It was noticing you. For a second, emotion filled her eyes again. This time she didn't hide it. Because some moments deserve honesty. Months later, Chicago entered autumn. The trees along the lake turned gold. The air became crisp. And Maya Brooks walked through the doors of a medical interpreter program she once believed she'd never afford. Her tuition was covered. Her future finally open. Denise's treatments continued, without the constant fear of unpaid bills. Caleb returned to school full-time, without working exhausting overnight shifts. The scholarship fund launched 6 months later, officially named the Chen Brooks Language Fund, in honor of 2 women who had shaped Maya's life, her mother and Mrs. Chen. The first year, 12 students received scholarships, children from immigrant families, children from neighborhoods often overlooked, children carrying gifts nobody had noticed yet. Henry Lawson became a mentor to the program. Mr. Liang helped connect students with international opportunities. The fund grew, year after year. Meanwhile, inside Lakeshore Terrace, Daniel Mercer placed a framed photograph behind the bar. The image showed Maya standing in her black apron on the night everything changed, the gold lights of the restaurant glowing around her. The photograph carried a small brass plaque beneath it. 4 simple words. Talent doesn't wait to be invited. Employees read it every day. Guests asked about it. The story spread, not because of the money, not because of the bet, not because a millionaire lost, because kindness won. Years later, people would forget the exact amount of the check. They would forget the details of the contract. They would forget what was served for dinner that night. But they would remember Maya Brooks, the waitress who refused to let someone else define her value, the daughter who carried her family through hardship, the woman who turned a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for others, and perhaps most importantly, the person who stopped for a stranger in the rain when she believed he had nothing to offer her. Because that was the real beginning of the story. Not the bet, not the applause, not the job offer. The beginning was kindness, a bowl of hot soup, a borrowed scarf, a few minutes of compassion. Proof that sometimes the smallest decisions create the largest futures. The world is full of people carrying extraordinary gifts. Most never get asked about them. Most never get the chance to show them. But every now and then someone takes the time to look closer. And when that happens, lives change, including their own. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share the talent nobody knows you carry. Because somewhere out there, another Maya Brooks may be waiting for someone to finally see her. And before you go, I want to ask you something simple. Do you believe kindness still matters in today's world? If your answer is yes, type the number 1 in the comments. Just a single one. I read every comment. And I'd love to see how many people still believe that one act of kindness can change a life. And if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or judged before someone knew your story, type the number 7. Let's show each other we're not alone. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every week, we bring you powerful stories about ordinary people, unexpected kindness, life-changing twists, and the moments that remind us what really matters. So subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us for the next unforgettable story. Until then, take care of yourself, be kind to someone today, and remember, you never know whose life you might change just by stopping long enough to see them. I'll see you in the next story.